I asked him if he could make me some food, and he went downstairs and I heard this big smack. I rushed down there and found him lying in a pool of blood. You said I've had a lot of speculation out there. I've had a lot of people sit there and say, yeah, she pushed him.
Why was there speculation that he was murdered? What were the altercations that he was involved in during the last years of his life? What was his childhood like? And who are the ones who scammed him to corrupt his trust in his surroundings? What terrible secrets came to light after his tragic death? How did his agonizing photo end up in the hands of the press? In this report, we'll discuss that topic and many others. He was probably the most famous child star of the late 20th century. Not only was his face immediately recognized by millions of viewers around the world, but his famous catchphrase, "What are you talking about, Willis?" was, and is repeated by everyone who saw in him the mark of an era. But it wasn't only about public favor. Comedy legends like Bob Hope himself or Lucille Ball, the adored star of I Love Lucy, they did not hesitate to refer to him as a true genius, a genius whose innocence we saw die almost in real time. The impact of Gary Coleman's brief career on popular culture can only be compared to the hidden tragedy he carried on his shoulders until his sad end. Black and White, the series that launched him to fame, will be remembered as one of the most important in history. But this young man, who seemed to stay frozen in time as he earned huge amounts of money, came of age. With his career liquidated, his dollars squandered, and a long-repressed darkness growing within him, a darkness that was devouring his light, the light of the spotlights and of his own soul. Sean, welcome to the dark side of Gary Coleman. And before we start, I want to ask you, if you watched the series Black and White, what you thought of it, whether you liked it or not. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this classic series, particularly during the 1980s and 1990s. And I have a question for the most nostalgic among you. Let's see if you know it. Turns out Arnold had a fish in this series. Do you remember what this Arnold's fish was called? I want to read your comments down below. Let's see who responds to this first. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And I remind you that there are uncensored and ad-free versions for channel members by clicking the button that says join down below. Let's get started. Tracy Fields, a bus driver from Los Angeles, was a fan of the legendary Black and White. She had grown up watching that popular series that had become a bastion of racial integrity and whose morals always sought to empathize with the most human and supportive side of the audience. That's why, when Tracy saw the little security guard at the mall she was entering, it took her a few seconds to convince herself that she had none other than the idol of her youth in front of her. Was it him? Could it be true? Did he have the very Gary Coleman in front of his eyes? Was he a few meters away from that bright-eyed child who had managed to move an entire generation? Tracy approached Gary excitedly and asked for his autograph, seeming surreal but genuine. She was unprepared for what happened. The former actor looked at her disdainfully, refusing to sign anything for her. Tracy and Gary provided contradictory accounts of the confusing episode that followed. According to Gary, Tracy mocked his recent career failures as revenge for his refusal. Tracy said there was no provocation. The truth is that dozens of witnesses could see an enraged Gary Coleman swing at the woman to start hitting her in the face with fury. And once, and again and again and again. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To understand how Gary Coleman, the most beloved child by an entire generation, ended up like this, it's necessary that we start from the beginning. Gary Wayne Coleman was born in Zion, Illinois on February 8, 1968. And just like what would happen to his alter ego, as if fate was marked for him, he never got to know his parents. He was given up for adoption and received into the family of Willie G. Coleman, a forklift operator, and his wife Edmonia Sue, who was a specialized nurse. No one could imagine that the small, friendly, and chubby boy the Colemans had received into their home was destined to be a star, nor that it would be a shooting star. From the beginning, Gary was both blessed and cursed. At the same time, he suffered from focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, a kidney disease that had to be treated with corticosteroids and other drugs. which, although they managed to keep his disease under control, had notable consequences on his body. The most evident was the one that kept him as the protagonist of the most successful series of his time for 8 years. And it is that the treatment that saved his life when he was only 1 meter and 42 centimeters tall stopped his growth and left him carrying the image of a child. In 1973, Gary underwent a kidney transplant that did not work, and the outlooks around him became dark. Just as life was hitting him on one side, on the other, it seemed to have given him a particular gift. The gift of facing all with integrity and cheer, at least temporarily. Always enthusiastic, Gary began his acting career in 1974, appearing in commercials and making small appearances on television shows. But he would soon receive the biggest and most important role of his life in 1978. Vic Perillo, his representative, suddenly appeared at the Coleman's house and got 10-year-old Gary and his parents into the car. He had just made a big deal and was not going to let it slip through his fingers. Without much explanation, the Colemans were received at the executive offices of National Broadcasting Company studios in Los Angeles. At a huge conference table, they found themselves sitting next to the famous producer Norman Lear, the network president Fred Silverman, and the renowned actor Conrad Bain. The producer, without much ado, introduced them to a concept he had been working on for some time. It was a story about a wealthy white widower from Manhattan who adopted 2 African-American children. After running out of breath from telling the synopsis, Lear turned around and made his intentions clear. Did he want Gary to play the younger brother in that charming blended family? All eyes turned to the boy who, optimistic and already accustomed to fighting to get ahead, shrugged and smiled. But of course, that wasn't enough. Things are never that easy in the entertainment world. Right there, and to his surprise, his agent got serious and clarified that to fully earn the role, he had to engage in an acting improvisation with Conrad. His parents hesitated. Suddenly, that was a lot of pressure. Even so, Gary smiled again and got off his chair, ready to prove that he was a safe investment. The testimonies agree that the improvisation between the 10-year-old and the established actor was brilliant. They seemed like colleagues who had spent years touring in the theater. Any doubt was dispelled, and 6 episodes of Different Strokes were ordered, completely skipping the pilot. That's how confident they were. And they were not wrong. Depending on the area where it premiered, Different Strokes would be known as Arnold or as Black and White. A success was about to be born, a success that would soon turn into a dark nightmare. Gary and his parents returned to their home in Chicago, unable to believe what was coming. With that feeling, they packed their bags. In a week, they had to be in Hollywood. That night, Sue told Willie that she was worried that the television series would be too much for their sick son. The man was emphatic with his response. Gary was going to be okay. Everyone would ensure his well-being was prioritized. They would take care of him, pamper him, weave for him the best of destinies. A promise that he fulfilled and broke in equal parts. Different Strokes received mixed reviews on National Broadcasting Company, but Fred Silverman, who had taken over the project, never lost hope at any moment. Faced with the uncertainties of others, he asked for patience. He knew that when households got to know Gary in depth, the magnetism would be imminent. Considering what happened, we can affirm he was absolutely right. The ratings soon took off and Black and White became the #1 series. Conrad Bain repeated for those years. And to anyone who asked, that Gary's acting ability was exceptional, and his timing was better than any other actor he had known. The praises rained down, the covers came, the interviews, they were everyday things. They stood before an undeniably obedient, charismatic, and proactive prodigy. As if that were not enough, they were also in front of a dollar-generating machine. Gary's parents, along with his agent, then defined the positions with which they would manage the young star's career. They appointed accountant Anita De Thomas, lawyers Harry Sloan and Larry Kupin, and publicist Larry Goldman. By forming this team, they aimed to show their dedication to giving their best for their son. If they knew from the beginning that they were going to end up scamming him, it's something we can't know. As agreed, Willie and Sue would receive 20% of the child's earnings as personal administrators. Quite a business, considering that Gary's salary went from an initial $1,600 to $25,000 per episode. Ironically, and despite his stature, he was becoming a giant in the industry. But the child cared little about those things. In his fantasies, acting would bring him closer to other children who would be attracted to his figure. That way, he could be all the friends that his illness had not allowed him to make. When he discovered that filming meant spending long hours surrounded by worried adults, his illusions began to fade. Once again, everything turned gray and health problems became the center of attention. In 1983, he had to repeat the kidney transplant surgery. Once again, things did not go as expected, and it was concluded that Gary had to undergo dialysis for the rest of his days. With dignity, the actor accepted once again, as he did with everything. But the straw that would break the camel's back was about to arrive, and with it, everything would go out of control. The sad adolescence of Gary. Gary had seemed content and fulfilled in interviews as his career rapidly advanced. He frequently expressed that he owed everything to his mother and stressed that his relationship with his father had drastically improved. Everything seemed to be marked by good fortune, and critics predicted a bright future for him. However, it was all a facade. Between recordings, Gary underwent a devastating treatment that left him reflective and sad. Gradually, his thoughts became more and more distressing, and things got worse, with the onset of puberty in his life. By then, Gary was a shy teenager with women, deeply convinced that he could not genuinely be attractive to any girl. Did he know or think he knew that if they approached him it was because of his huge success and not for other reasons? Was his resentment born at that moment? We only know that the idea of continuing to play an 8-year-old child no longer seemed exciting. The consequences? Gary started to become taciturn, hostile, not very cordial. When he yelled action, he puffed up his cheeks, moved lively, and made everyone laugh. When cut was yelled, a cold expression covered his features. Upon winning the People's Choice Award for the 4th consecutive year as the best young artist on television, he could only sigh. Many envied his life as a child, privileged with a job in the entertainment world. At the same time, he desired something else, something simpler, a bit of love. With the atmosphere becoming increasingly tense, even unusual confrontations broke out. Conrad Bain, who had praised him so much, began to show annoyance at how Gary was stealing the limelight. The discomfort spread to the rest of the cast. As if something was missing, Gary suddenly found himself confronted by all those who had told him for years they admired him. But there's more. Gary's parents, Willie and Sue, were constantly on set, hovering, asking questions and giving out-of-place opinions. In the face of this combo, Gary ended up retreating more and more into himself, weaving a consolation. At least he still had his millions. He used to tell himself that sooner or later, when he was older, he could take his fortune and try to find his place in the world. Away from so many interested people, he couldn't imagine that he was about to receive a very hard blow regarding all of that. The typical hormonal boiling of 16 years old made the little patience that was still left in Gary jump into the abyss. He was no longer happy at all with that supposed dream job. His parents were more like jailers than responsible caregivers, and his peers seemed to have a silent war against him, filled with envy. It was at that key moment that a new character entered his life, Dion Mail. A slightly older boy who had had a role as an extra in the series and who would later become his personal assistant. Their relationship grew increasingly close. Dion was tall and athletic, everything Gary aspired to be. Moreover, Dion craved the fame that Gary already had plenty of. Gary's parents approved of this friendship, so when the young man asked if he could move in with Dion to his own apartment, they did not hesitate to encourage him. In the new place, Gary set up train models that ran through all the rooms. Late into the night, he wrote poetry and drew detailed figures of fantasy superheroes, projecting a strength and boldness he felt he lacked. In secret, he longed to be more like other young people his age and at the same time seemed to cling to a childhood where everything was simpler. You didn't have to be very observant to know that Gary was torn between two versions of himself, and even then, his closest surroundings began to wonder which one would win. They knew that the actor was on the verge of breaking, a break that finally happened during a break in filming. That midday seemed like just another day of filming on the set of Black and White, however, it would mark a before and after. As everyone refreshed and prepared to return on stage, Willie heard muffled screams from the dressing rooms. He went to Gary's and confirmed that the violent sounds were coming from there. Upon entering, he witnessed a scene that could never have been conceived in the Todd Bridges series. The friendly Willis has Gary immobilized on the ground and was hitting him. That's how rough things had become between them. Gary's father separated them, but the relationship between the brothers in fiction would never be the same again. The shooting was cancelled for the day. Before Irsegari made it known to everyone that he didn't need a few hours break, he wanted a permanent break. At that time, his salary per episode was $100,000. Before talking about Black and White, I want to tell you that there is talk of a kind of curse that haunted the lives of everyone who was involved, both in front of the screen and behind the scenes. Another one of those affected by this so-called curse, obviously, was the actress Dana Plato. If you want us to talk about Dana, I want to read your comments below. Say if I want to see Dana's documentary. If Dana yes, put Dana yes. If you want, put Dana yes in the comments. And if we exceed 5,000 likes on this video, in 24 hours we are going to make a second part telling the tragic life of Dana Plato, which is even, I don't know if worse than what happened to Gary Coleman. At 17 years old, Gary said a final goodbye to the series that had put him in the spotlight of all media. But the long-awaited freedom came upon him with the fury of a wild animal, something that the small and immature Gary was not prepared to endure. Gary convinced his representative to seek new horizons. He had more mature projects in mind that would showcase his full talent, as Black and White only utilized a fraction of it. But Hollywood was not interested in hiring a small actor who had once been famous for playing a child. Gary faced the reality of the show business world and the situation of his own life. He was already an adult, but everyone still saw him as a child. The film began with this revelation. After short appearances showed his image was no longer profitable. Gary's optimistic character began to sour and disappointments came one after another. Without giving him time or space to recover, Gary became depressed and began to make harsh statements against the industry. He even told the press that he believed the idiots in the television business were only interested in tried and true formulas. In a bitter television interview, he also said that he felt his future was behind him. In reality, everything was behind him, but there was someone who hadn't abandoned him. Good old Dion Terry, this young man's mother, also became friends with Gary, started spending more time in the apartment that the others shared. The woman, very kind and with a great ability to listen, ended up learning Gary's story and concluded that, indeed, everyone had deceived him. But not only that, the woman dared to open a door that the actor had blocked for years. With a calm tone and knowing, maybe the answer told him, "But Gary, what happened to your fortune? And Gary?" Without a job and with no real expectation of getting one shuddered at the mere thought of what the other was suggesting. The worst scenario was finally confirmed for him when Anita de Tomas, his accountant, admitted over the phone that she didn't exactly know where his parents had invested most of their money. Facing an imminent new bout of depression, he was told that he needed to take legal action. Another harsh disappointment was looming. Disillusionment is a bad advisor. The fall from grace of Gary Coleman could have been a very unfortunate combination. A premature success that prevented him from maturing emotionally. A series of disappointments added to a serious incurable disease and certain medical details. It was studied that some people treated from an early age with the medication that Gary was forced to use developed a violent and bitter character. Upon discovering that his fortune had practically disappeared and that the industry was not interested in making the effort to create a new image that would separate him from Little Arnold, the actor fell into an emotional pit. To another journalist, he said, "I blame my parents for not knowing how to manage my life. They were supposed to do it right." By that time, Gary had sued those who had managed his fortune and had won a lawsuit for $1 million. However, and according to some estimates, he would have been scammed for almost 20 times that number. The decline was as deep as it was silent. He managed to get some insignificant roles, was honored in cartoons, and some campaigns had him as a focus. But nothing could make him be seen as in the 80s, and rumors that he had tried to take his own life became more and more common. Declaring bankruptcy, Gary had to work as a security guard at a shopping mall in Los Angeles to survive. But his resentment and bad temper would only bring him more problems than he could handle. Not to mention, in 1998, he was accused of assault while working at the mall. And that's how our story comes back to the beginning. In search of the lost piece. Coleman was arrested after assaulting a woman who requested his autograph. He defended himself by saying that he had felt harassed, received a suspended jail sentence, and was ordered to pay his victim's hospital bill, a total of $1,665. He also had to take an anger management course. In 2003, Coleman's candidacy for California governor made news again. He finished 8th out of 23 candidates for a position that ended up in the hands of another famous Arnold, the muscular Schwarzenegger. Gary moved to Utah in 2005, and in the first 5 years he lived there, the police had to be called more than 20 times for his unruly behavior. The following year, a 24-year-old man named Colt Rushton photographed Gary in a public place without his consent. Coleman's violent nature turned a manageable situation into a real uproar again. Rushton and Gary argued, but things wouldn't end there. In the parking lot of the place, Gary backed into his reckless admirer. The injuries were minor, but he received another fine and had to pay the medical bills again. He seemed lost in a spiral of violence, but then he fell in love. Was peace finally coming to his life? No, the truth is that the woman he was going to marry was going to be the protagonist of the next scandals. Violent love. At the beginning of 2007, during the filming of the movie Charge Ball, Gary met Shannon Price, a redhead who worked as an extra and was 18 years younger. Actors said intelligence matters more than height difference. They married in February 2008. In that year, at the age of 40, Coleman admitted he had never had sexual intercourse. He seemed confident and expressed optimism about something good happening to him for the first time. However, that did not occur. That same year, he received a citation for disturbing the peace in the state of Utah after an argument with his recent wife got out of control. Both were cited, but Shannon was under suspicion of domestic violence, a background that would result in very uncomfortable rumors shortly after. The most sensationalist producers then saw a good opportunity, and that's how Gary and Shannon appeared on a reality show to resolve their differences. The reality show Divorce Court put before our eyes in the episode aired on May 1, 2008. Once again to the very famous Arnold, but this time stripped of his childlike charm and joy. The face no longer seemed tied to good times, now it seemed to have seen and suffered too much. The program was a total boom and interest in Gary Coleman was trending again. For a few weeks. Gary and Shannon stayed together, and a year later they were cited again for disturbances due to another fight. On this occasion, Gary spent the night in jail. The last fall. 2010 was a bad year for the former television star. He suffered 2 seizures at the beginning of the year, while recovering from a heart surgery that had been performed months earlier. One of them took place on the set of the talk show The Insider. But even though these events were not front-page news, Gary made headlines again on May 26th. In a confusing incident, he fell down the stairs of his Utah home, hitting his head. Shannon, from whom he had already divorced but still lives with him, found him and called 911, saying there was blood everywhere. Coleman had injured the back of his head but briefly regained consciousness. When officers arrived, he spoke with them and said he couldn't recall what had occurred. The actor could walk with help from the house to the garage where a stretcher awaited him. According to reports, Coleman was awake and lucid on the morning of May 27th, so it seemed like he might have recovered. Unfortunately, his condition worsened that afternoon and he fell into a coma. Life support was withdrawn on May 28th, ending his life. He was 42 years old. Gary's tumultuous relationship with his wife fueled a series of assumptions in the newspapers and tabloid sites. Suspicions that it was Shannon Price herself who precipitated the end of the weakened Gary, pushing him down the stairs, have circulated ever since, although this possibility was never seriously investigated. Less than 2 weeks had passed since the actor's death, when the cover of the Globe tabloid showed an image that shocked the United States. In it, Gary could be seen intubated. It's the last known photo of him alive. Immediately, Shannon was accused of unscrupulously selling the photograph to continue profiting from the image of her ex-husband. There was talk that the sale would have meant $10,000 in cash for her. In 2022, comedian Molly Shannon revealed that she was sexually harassed by Gary Coleman when he was 18 years old. The incident occurred when the actress was starting her career, and she said she had to kick him in order to escape. Coleman's will from 1999 named his friend Dion Mill as executor. and it ordered that his wake be carried out by people who have no financial ties with me and can look each other in the eyes. However, that document was later replaced by one directly ordering no service, funeral, wake, or other ceremony commemorating his death. Sue Coleman and her husband Willie had tried to gain custody of their son's body to return it to Illinois, once it was known that he had divorced his wife in 2008, but they did not succeed. As per Gary's will, his body was cremated. The last thing that was known about his ashes is that they remained in the possession of his ex-wife, who would wait for the court order to scatter them. At the Golden Spike Historical Park, a site in Utah that symbolizes the journey of the first transnational railroad in the United States. Whether that was executed or not is unknown to us. In Gary Coleman's life, it is evident that there were no gray areas, as ironic or cruel as it may seem. Everything was black or white until the end. That concludes today's video. I hope you found Gary Coleman's story fascinating, albeit problematic and quite sad. And I remind you that we can do a second part. We talked about Dana Clayton. In this second part we will talk, so if you want it to happen, write Dana yes in the comments. And I also invite you to leave your like. If we exceed 5,000 likes on this video, we will be preparing the second part. I thank each and every one of the channel members, because thanks to them we can make these videos that are often demonetized and hidden in YouTube recommendations. If you want to see a demonetized and hidden video, check out Top of Prisons, which YouTube has demonetized. An age restriction was also applied, severely limiting its reach. So type in Top Prisons Magnus and it will appear, surely it should appear in the search. And if not, is it available uncensored for channel members, so you can go see it there. That's all for now. I'm Magnus Mephisto signing off. Check out the linked videos to continue watching. See you next time.